Rain tapped a mournful rhythm against the windowpane of Eleanor's bedchamber, as Anna, her lady's maid, fastened the last pearl button of the ivory wedding gown. The silk whispered against the floor as Eleanor turned to face the looking-glass. At 20, with chestnut curls framing her heart-shaped face and amber eyes that should have sparkled with joy, she saw only resignation staring back. "You look beautiful, Miss Eleanor," Anna whispered, adjusting the delicate veil. "Thank you, Anna," Eleanor replied, forcing a smile that never reached her eyes. "Though I believe you must call me Your Grace after today." Descending the staircase of Willow House, Eleanor noted the subtle signs of neglect, the faded wallpaper, the slightly worn carpet that spoke of her father's financial ruin. Lord Edward waited at the bottom, his shoulders stooped beneath the weight of their circumstances. "My dear girl," he said, his voice catching, "you are the very image of your mother." "Father, please," Eleanor whispered, adjusting her gloves. "Let us not pretend this day is anything but what it is, a transaction." Lord Edward's face fell. "Eleanor, the Duke of Ravenwood is the best match in England. Any young lady would sacrifice herself for his title and fortune." Eleanor finished, immediately regretting her sharpness. "Forgive me, Father. I know you had no choice." The carriage ride to St. George's Church passed in heavy silence. Through the window, Eleanor watched London's fashionable streets slip by, mansions of cream-colored stone, iron fences guarding manicured gardens, ladies with parasols and gentlemen in top hats, all unaware she traveled toward a life sentence. The city bustled with cheerful ignorance as her father whispered, "Courage, my dear," when the carriage finally slowed before the imposing neoclassical facade. A crowd had gathered outside the church, eager to witness the social event of the season, the marriage of Alexander Sterling, the Duke of Ravenwood, London's most eligible bachelor, to the daughter of an impoverished viscount. Eleanor felt the weight of their stares as the footman opened the carriage door. Whispers rippled through the assembled aristocracy like wind through wheat, and she clutched her father's arm, her knuckles white against the ivory silk of her gown. Inside the church, hundreds of candles illuminated the solemn space, their flickering light catching on the gold leaf and stained glass. Eleanor kept her eyes fixed on the stone floor as she walked down the aisle on her father's arm, the congregation turning as one to witness her arrival. At the altar stood a tall, broad-shouldered figure in formal black attire, imposing even in stillness. When she finally dared to glance up, her breath caught. Alexander Sterling, the 8th Duke of Ravenwood, was devastatingly handsome, with sharp aristocratic features, raven black hair, and eyes the color of a winter sea. But it was the coldness in those eyes that made her shiver beneath her gown. "Dearly beloved," the bishop began, his voice echoing through the cavernous church. The ceremony passed in a blur. Eleanor spoke her vows mechanically, promising to love and honor a stranger. When the Duke slipped the heavy gold ring onto her finger, his touch was impersonal, as if he were merely signing a document. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the bishop declared finally. "Your Grace, you may kiss your bride." Alexander leaned forward, and for a brief moment something flickered in his eyes, not warmth, but perhaps curiosity. His lips brushed against hers in the lightest of touches, formal and proper, lasting barely a second before he withdrew. The kiss was over before it began, a whisper of contact that left Eleanor colder than the church marble. As Alexander drew back, his winter sea eyes revealed nothing of the man behind them, though for one fleeting moment she thought she saw something akin to assessment in his gaze. The congregation's applause echoed hollowly in her ears as they turned to face the crowd, now husband and wife in name, yet strangers in truth. The reception at Ravenwood House was lavish beyond imagining. Crystal chandeliers scattered light across mountains of hothouse flowers, while an orchestra played gentle waltzes for the cream of London society. Alexander performed his duties as host with practiced precision, yet barely acknowledged his new wife beyond what propriety demanded. Eleanor accepted congratulations with gracious smiles, feeling like a particularly well-dressed ornament as she watched him move through the crowd, always just out of reach, always surrounded by admirers. The champagne tasted like ashes, the laughter like mockery. As evening fell and the last guests departed, Eleanor found herself standing alone in an opulent bedchamber, surrounded by her belongings that had been delivered earlier. A fire crackled in the marble hearth, and the bed, massive and draped in crimson velvet, dominated the room. The door opened, and she turned, heart hammering against her ribs. Alexander entered, still in his formal attire, though he had removed his white gloves. Without preamble, he poured himself a glass of brandy from a crystal decanter. "Your Grace," Eleanor said, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "I hope our union may grow to be amicable at least." The Duke regarded her silently, his expression unreadable. Then he drained his glass and set it down carefully. "Lady Ravenwood," he said, using her new title for the first time. His voice was deep and cultured with the precise diction of a man accustomed to command. "Let us be clear about our arrangement. This marriage fulfills certain obligations for us both. You gain a title and financial security. I satisfy the requirements of my station." He moved toward the door, then paused, his hand on the ornate brass handle. "You will spend the wedding night alone, and every night thereafter. I have no interest in a true marriage. Good evening." With that, he was gone, leaving Eleanor standing in the middle of the room, her wedding dress suddenly feeling as heavy as the realization that she had married a man whose heart was as cold as the rain outside. Alone in the vast bedchamber, Eleanor finally allowed her tears to fall. They traced paths through the powder on her cheeks, darkening the ivory silk at her collar. As she moved to unfasten the gown herself, her eyes caught on the bottom drawer of her writing desk, the one where she had hidden her sketching materials. The sight of the slightly ajar drawer with the corner of her sketchbook visible sparked a faint ember of defiance in her chest. She would find solace in her art, as she always had. Wiping her tears, she resolved that this gilded cage would not completely break her spirit. The days settled into a predictable rhythm. Eleanor's mornings were filled with social calls and managing the Duke's 3 residences: Ravenwood House in London, the country estate in Hampshire, and the hunting lodge in Scotland. Despite sharing a household, she rarely saw her husband. Alexander rose early and retired late, filling his days with Parliament, his clubs, and business matters. When their paths did cross at dinner or social functions, he was unfailingly polite, but distant, treating her more as a particularly efficient housekeeper than a wife. In the quiet hours between obligations, Eleanor would steal away to a window seat overlooking the garden, her sketchbook capturing the play of light on leaves, or the weary slope of a maid's shoulders. In her private sitting room one afternoon, Eleanor opened her sketchbook to a fresh page. With quick, sure strokes, she began drawing a portrait of young Mary, the upstairs maid, from memory, capturing the girl's shy smile and the way she tucked a stray curl behind her ear. The charcoal moved effortlessly under her fingers, the lines precise, yet full of empathy. When footsteps echoed in the corridor outside, she quickly closed the book and slid it into the hidden compartment of her desk, her heart beating just a little too fast at the near discovery. Dinner that evening was a quiet affair. They ate in near silence, the only sounds the clinking of silverware against fine china. Alexander occasionally commented on estate business or parliamentary matters, his tone impersonal. When Eleanor ventured a question about his day, he answered briefly before returning to his correspondence. "The weather looks to turn cold." She tried again, seeking some connection. "Indeed," he replied, without looking up from his papers. "See that the household is prepared." She nodded, the hope in her eyes fading as she returned to her meal. From the garden terrace the next morning, Eleanor discreetly observed old Mr. Higgins, the head gardener, as he trimmed the rose bushes. His gnarled hands moved with practiced care, his face etched with lines of sun and years. She captured the dignity in his stooped posture, the quiet dedication in his eyes, the very opposite of the glittering superficiality she encountered in ballrooms. In sketching those whom society overlooked, she found a connection to humanity that her marriage lacked, each stroke of charcoal a silent rebellion against her isolation. London's summer season was in full swing, and tonight they were to attend Lady Hartington's ball. Eleanor sat at her dressing table as Anna arranged her hair in an elegant chignon adorned with pearl pins. "The sapphire necklace, your grace?" the maid asked, opening a velvet box containing one of the many Ravenwood family jewels now at Eleanor's disposal. "Yes, thank you, Anna." Eleanor touched the magnificent blue stones that matched her gown of midnight silk. These treasures should have delighted her, yet they felt like gilded chains. A knock at the door announced a footman bearing a note. Eleanor broke the seal to find her husband's precise handwriting. "I shall meet you directly at Hartington House. Do not wait." Ravenwood. "Will there be a reply, your grace?" the footman asked. "No," Eleanor said softly. "No reply necessary." Later, as her carriage rolled through Mayfair toward the ball, Eleanor steeled herself for another evening of performance, smiling graciously while weathering pitying glances and whispered gossip about her marriage of convenience to London's most desired duke. The streets glowed with carriage lamps, each light representing another household where perhaps genuine affection existed. She pushed the thought away, focusing instead on maintaining the serene composure expected of a duchess. When the carriage finally pulled up before Hartington House, its windows blazing with light, she took a deep breath and prepared to face the world alone once more. The ballroom of Lady Hartington's London residence blazed with light, crystal chandeliers casting a shimmering glow over the assembled aristocracy. Eleanor ascended the marble staircase, her midnight silk gown whispering against the steps, the sapphire necklace at her throat feeling more like a weight than an adornment. As she reached the top, the butler's voice boomed through the grand space. "Her Grace, the Duchess of Ravenwood." A hush fell momentarily, followed by a wave of curtsies and bows, deeper than any she had received before. Smiles turned ingratiating, eyes assessing. Eleanor forced a gracious nod, her gaze sweeping the crowded room for any sign of Alexander, but he was nowhere to be seen. She stood alone, a solitary figure amid the swirling silks and satins, the title she carried doing little to warm the chill of isolation. From the sidelines, where the orchestra played a soft melody, Lady Beatrice approached with a warm smile. "Your Grace, you look radiant tonight," she said, linking her arm through Eleanor's with an ease that felt genuine. "I was hoping to find you here. Where is that elusive husband of yours?" Eleanor managed a slight smile. "He is to meet me here, though I confess I have not seen him yet." Beatrice's eyes twinkled with mischief and kindness. "Then you must allow me to introduce you to some friends while you wait. But first, tell me, how are you finding life as the Duchess? Alexander can be distant, I know. He was not always so. Before India, in his army days, he was quite different. Warm, even idealistic. Something there changed him profoundly." Her voice dropped slightly, hinting at secrets buried in the past. Eleanor's eyes finally found Alexander across the ballroom, deep in conversation with the Earl of Montclair. Even from a distance, he commanded attention, his tall frame impeccably dressed in formal black, his bearing regal without effort. The crowd seemed to part around him as if by unspoken accord. Lady Beatrice followed her gaze. "There he is. Still the most handsome man in London, wouldn't you agree? Every unmarried lady is green with envy." Eleanor felt a pang of sadness, remembering the coldness in his eyes. "Indeed," she murmured, her heart aching at the contrast between the man the world saw and the stranger she knew. The orchestra struck up a waltz, and Alexander appeared at her side as if materializing from the air. "Your Grace!" His deep voice sent a shiver through her. "I believe this is our dance." Without waiting for a response, he extended his hand. Eleanor placed her fingers in his, feeling the unexpected warmth of his touch as he led her onto the floor. His hand settled at her waist with perfect propriety, and they began to move with the music, their steps in sync, though their hearts were miles apart. "I did not expect you to claim a dance, Your Grace," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Appearances must be maintained," he replied, guiding her through a turn with effortless skill. "We have been married months. People would talk if we did not dance at least once." Eleanor's eyes met his, emboldened by the privacy of the crowded floor. "Heaven forbid there should be talk. I merely find it ironic that we must pretend to be a happy couple in public when in private we are barely acquaintances." Alexander's jaw tightened imperceptibly, but his steps never faltered. "You knew the nature of our arrangement before the wedding." "Did I?" she challenged softly. "I knew it was a marriage of convenience, yes, but I did not expect such complete indifference." For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, not anger, but a flicker of surprise. "Indifference is preferable to the alternatives, I assure you," he said, his voice low and strained, before the music ended and he escorted her from the floor. As they reached the edge of the ballroom, a commotion near the entrance drew all eyes. A disheveled man in the faded uniform of an army officer was arguing loudly with the butler, his voice slurred with drink. "I tell you, I must speak with the Duke," he insisted, his words carrying across the suddenly silent room. "It's a matter of life and death." The music faltered, and conversations died as heads turned. Eleanor felt Alexander stiffen beside her. "Stay here," he commanded, his voice tight, before striding across the room. The officer spotted him. "Ravenwood, there you are, you heartless bastard. My brother is dead because of you." Gasps rippled through the guests. Alexander reached the man, speaking in a low, intense tone that Eleanor could not hear. But whatever he said only enraged the officer further. "You think your title can wash away what you did," the man shouted, his face contorted with grief and fury. Alexander grabbed his arm firmly and forcibly led him from the ballroom, disappearing into a side room, leaving a stunned silence in their wake. Lady Beatrice appeared at Eleanor's side, her expression troubled. "My goodness," she whispered, drawing Eleanor away from the staring crowd. "That was Captain Grayson, my late husband's cousin. He served with Alexander in India years ago." Eleanor's eyes widened. "Alexander was in the army?" "Oh, yes, before he inherited the title. He was considered quite the hero, but he never speaks of it. There was some terrible business there. An ambush, I believe. Richard, my husband, would never discuss the details, but whatever happened, it changed Alexander profoundly. The man who returned was cold." Beatrice squeezed Eleanor's hand. "My dear, perhaps there is more to your husband than meets the eye." The side door opened, and Alexander emerged alone, his expression composed though a muscle twitched in his jaw. He crossed the ballroom with measured steps, nodding a curt apology to their host before returning to Eleanor's side. "We are leaving," he said quietly but firmly, his voice leaving no room for argument. The controlled urgency in his tone sent a ripple of concern through her, and she nodded silently, allowing him to guide her from the ballroom without another word. In the carriage, the darkness of the London streets slipped by outside, the clip-clop of hooves the only sound for long moments. Eleanor waited, but Alexander stared fixedly out the window, his profile sharp against the passing lights. Finally, she broke the silence. Who was that man? What did he mean about his brother? Alexander's gaze remained on the window. "It is not your concern." Eleanor's patience snapped. "I believe it is. I am your wife, if only in name. Whatever affects you affects me as well." He turned to her then, his eyes cold in the dim light. "You are my wife on paper, Duchess. That gives you no right to my past or my private affairs." "Then what rights do I have in this marriage?" she demanded, her voice rising with frustration. "To wear your jewels, to preside over your dinner table, to be paraded before society as proof of your respectability, while you treat me as nothing more than a convenient ornament." Alexander stared at her, seemingly taken aback by her outburst. For a moment, something like admiration crossed his features. "You have spirit, Duchess. I had not expected that." "There is much about me you have not troubled yourself to learn, Your Grace," she retorted, the words hanging in the air as the carriage pulled up to Ravenwood House. In the grand entrance hall, the silence echoed around them. Alexander paused at the foot of the staircase, his hand resting on the polished banister. "Captain Grayson is a troubled man who blames others for his misfortunes," he said abruptly, not meeting her eyes. "Pay his accusations no mind." "Is that all you have to say?" Eleanor asked, her voice softer now, laced with a hope she could not suppress. He hesitated, and for a brief moment she glimpsed something vulnerable in his expression, a crack in the perfect facade. "Good night, Eleanor," he said, using her given name for the first time since their wedding day. Then he turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone with more questions than answers. Eleanor could not sleep. The moon cast silvery beams through her bedchamber windows, illuminating the opulent room that felt more like a prison than a home. Her mind raced with images of Alexander's strained composure, Captain Grayson's accusations, and Beatrice's hints about India. Rising, she wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and wandered the silent corridors of Ravenwood House. The ancestral portraits lining the walls seemed to watch her progress with disapproving eyes. As she passed Alexander's study, a sliver of light beneath the door caught her attention, and she heard the distinct sound of glass breaking from within. Concern overrode propriety, and she approached, her heart pounding. Pushing the door open, Eleanor found Alexander's study bathed in the glow of a dying fire. The room was a masculine sanctuary of leather-bound books and heavy furniture, the air thick with the scent of tobacco and whiskey. Alexander stood by the window, a glass in hand, the shattered remains of another glittering on the floor at his feet. "I said, go away," he repeated without turning, his voice rough with emotion. "Are you hurt?" Eleanor asked, eyeing the broken glass. "Only my pride," he replied bitterly. An infrequent but unpleasant experience. She moved to a side table, pouring a fresh measure of amber liquid from a decanter, and approached him cautiously, offering the glass. He accepted it with a raised eyebrow. "Do you make a habit of providing spirits to men in dark moods, Duchess?" "Only to husbands who look as though they need them," she replied softly. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. He gestured to a leather chair, and after a moment's hesitation, Eleanor sat. To her surprise, he took the chair opposite rather than dismissing her, the firelight casting shifting shadows across his troubled face. "Captain Grayson's brother served under my command in India," Alexander said suddenly, his voice low and controlled. "Lieutenant James Grayson, a good soldier. He died during a skirmish with rebels in '43. Eleanor remained silent, afraid that any word might cause him to withdraw again. "The captain believes I could have prevented his brother's death." Alexander stared into his glass, his knuckles white. "Perhaps he is right." "Is that why you left the army?" Eleanor asked gently. He looked up, surprise evident in his expression. "You know about my military service?" "Very little," she admitted. "Lady Beatrice mentioned it tonight. She said you were considered quite heroic." Alexander laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Heroic? Yes, that's the story told in London drawing rooms. The truth is considerably less flattering." He fell silent, then continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was young and arrogant, convinced of my own invincibility. I led a patrol into territory I had been warned was dangerous. We were ambushed. Grayson and 3 others died." His sleeve pulled back, revealing a long, pale scar running from wrist to elbow. "I survived with nothing worse than this." Eleanor's heart ached for him. "You cannot blame yourself for the fortunes of war." "Can I not?" His eyes met hers, intense and haunted. "I was their commanding officer. Their lives were my responsibility. I failed them through pride and recklessness." Understanding dawned on her. "And now you keep everyone at a distance." Alexander stiffened. "I think you presume too much, Duchess." "Do I?" She leaned forward, her voice gentle. "You maintain a perfect facade of control and indifference because you fear the consequences of caring too deeply again." He stood abruptly, moving back to the window. "It's late. You should retire." Eleanor rose but did not leave. "The man you were before India, the warm, idealistic man Lady Beatrice described, he still exists, doesn't he? Beneath the cold exterior of the Duke of Ravenwood." "That man died in India," he said flatly. "Good night, Duchess." This time, Eleanor recognized the dismissal for what it was. She moved to the door but paused on the threshold. "I do not believe he died, Your Grace." she said softly. "I believe he is merely lost, and perhaps someday he might be found again." Closing the door behind her, she left him alone with his demons. But as she walked back to her bedchamber, a flutter of hope stirred in her chest. Behind the Duke's perfect facade lay a wounded man, and in his wounds she had glimpsed his humanity. The next morning, sunlight streamed into the breakfast room, casting a golden glow over the formal setting. Eleanor and Alexander ate in a less tense silence than usual, the events of the night before hanging between them like an unspoken truce. Alexander set down his correspondence. "I shall be traveling to Ravenwood Park alone in a few days. Business matters to attend to that would bore you excessively." Eleanor sipped her tea, hiding her disappointment. "I had assumed we would journey together." He regarded her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Unless you particularly wish to come." She looked up, startled by the concession. "I would like to see Ravenwood Park. I've heard it's quite beautiful." Something that might have been satisfaction crossed his features. "Very well, we shall leave on Tuesday." The subtle shift in his tone, the slight softening around his eyes, filled her with a cautious optimism. In her room, Eleanor supervised as Anna packed her trunks for the country. "You seem in better spirits, Your Grace," Anna remarked, folding a gown with care. Eleanor smiled, tucking her sketchbook discreetly among her belongings. "The country air will do me good," she said, her fingers brushing the leather cover. She looked forward to the solitude of the estate, where she might sketch the landscapes and perhaps, just perhaps, find more moments of connection with Alexander. The carriage rolled through the English countryside, leaving London behind as fields of green and gold unfolded outside. Seated opposite Alexander, Eleanor watched the scenery pass, rolling hills dotted with sheep, villages clustered around church spires, forests tinged with the first hints of autumn. "The estate has been in my family for generations," Alexander said unexpectedly, breaking a silence that had lasted nearly an hour. "I spent most of my childhood there." Eleanor turned from the window. "It must hold many memories for you." "Indeed." His expression softened slightly. "London never felt like home in the same way." "And yet you spend most of your time in the city," she observed. "Duty requires it." He straightened his cuffs. "The business of the dukedom does not manage itself." "Surely you could delegate some responsibilities." He regarded her with newfound curiosity. "And what of you, Duchess? Do you prefer town or country?" The personal nature of the question surprised her. "The country, I think." Willow Manor was modest compared to your estates, but I loved its gardens and the surrounding woods. As a girl, I would spend hours reading beneath an old oak tree by the stream. "You enjoy reading?" he asked, as if this were a novel concept. Eleanor couldn't help but smile. "Is that so surprising? Women are permitted intellectual pursuits these days, Your Grace, even in the confines of marriage." To her astonishment, he returned her smile, a brief upturning of lips that transformed his stern features. "Forgive me, I did not mean to imply otherwise. What do you read?" "History, primarily, poetry. Some novels, though my father considered them frivolous." "The library at Ravenwood Park is extensive," he said. "You may find it to your liking." It was the closest thing to a personal kindness he had offered, and Eleanor felt an unexpected warmth spread through her chest. As evening approached, Ravenwood Park appeared on the horizon, a grand Palladian mansion of honey-colored stone, its windows catching the last golden rays of the setting sun. Formal gardens stretched before it, and beyond, a lake reflected the fading sky in a mirror of rose and gold. "It's beautiful," Eleanor whispered, her breath catching. Alexander glanced at her, seemingly pleased by her reaction. "Wait until you see it in morning light," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. The carriage rolled up the elm-lined drive, and for the first time, Eleanor felt a flicker of something akin to hope for their future together. The carriage rolled to a halt before Ravenwood Park, its honey-colored stone facade glowing in the fading evening light. Eleanor stepped out, her eyes widening at the grandeur of the Palladian mansion, its windows catching the last golden rays of sunset. Alexander followed, a rare smile touching his lips as he watched her reaction. The entrance hall was alive with warmth as the household staff lined up to greet them, their faces bright with genuine excitement. Mr. Phillips, the butler, bowed deeply, his voice resonant with respect. "Welcome home, your graces." Mrs. Winters, the housekeeper, stepped forward, her eyes crinkling with kindness. "We've prepared the Duchess suite, your grace," she said to Eleanor. "It has the finest views of the estate." Alexander moved closer, his voice soft. "It was my mother's favorite room." Eleanor felt a surge of emotion, the weight of his words settling in her heart as she took in the grand staircase and the staff's welcoming smiles, feeling for the first time a sense of belonging in this new world. Eleanor's suite was a vision of blue and gold, with silk brocade drapes and fresh flowers scenting the air. She ran her fingers over the delicate fabric of a chair, her heart swelling with honor. Alexander lingered in the doorway, his usual reserve softened by the intimate setting. "I thought perhaps," he began, hesitation coloring his tone, "if you are not too fatigued from the journey, you might join me for dinner in an hour." Eleanor turned, meeting his gaze with a grateful smile. "I would like that very much." His expression relaxed into one of relief, and he nodded before stepping back. "Until then, Duchess." As he left, Eleanor felt a flutter of hope, the room's elegance mirroring the growing closeness between them. Dinner was served in the smaller dining room, where candlelight cast a warm glow over the tables set for two. Alexander proved an attentive host, pouring wine and inquiring if the food met her approval. "Tell me about your childhood here," Eleanor said, her voice gentle. He seemed taken aback, but soon began to speak, his words painting vivid pictures of summers spent swimming in the lake and hiding from tutors in the hedge maze. "You sound as though you were quite the handful," she observed, smiling. "I was indeed," he admitted, a hint of nostalgia in his eyes. "My father despaired of me ever becoming a proper heir." Their conversation flowed easily, the fire crackling in the hearth as they shared stories, the distance between them narrowing with each exchanged memory. As dessert was served, rain began to patter against the tall windows, adding a cozy intimacy to the room. Alexander's expression grew reflective. "My father died when I was 15, he said, his voice low. "The title came to me 3 years later, when my grandfather passed." Eleanor reached across the table, her hand briefly touching his. It must have been a terrible burden. He studied her face, as if searching for understanding. It was challenging, but duty is duty. She shared her own loss, her mother's death from influenza, and for a moment they sat in shared silence, the rain drumming a gentle rhythm that underscored their bonding over grief and resilience. In the drawing room, the pianoforte stood gleaming in the firelight. Alexander gestured toward it. "Would you play something, Eleanor?" "Phillips mentioned you were practicing." She felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "I'm rather out of practice, I'm afraid." But at his encouraging nod, she seated herself and began a Chopin nocturne, her fingers finding the notes with growing confidence. As the music filled the room, Alexander moved to stand beside her, his gaze intense. When she finished, he whispered, "Beautiful," and she was not certain whether he meant the music or something else entirely. The moment hung between them, intimate and charged, before they parted for the night with soft goodnights. Unable to sleep, Eleanor wandered the moonlit corridors, the ancestral portraits seeming to watch her progress. A sliver of light beneath the door caught her attention, Alexander's study. She pushed it open quietly and found the room empty, a worn leather journal with a military insignia lying on the desk. A small key glinted beside it, and her hand hovered over it, tempted. But she remembered his guardedness and the trust they were building. With a resolute breath, she left the key untouched and retreated, her heart heavy with curiosity, but light with the respect she had shown. The next morning dawned clear, and Alexander led Eleanor to the stables, where a dappled gray mare whickered softly. "This is Artemis," he said, his voice warm. "She has a gentle temperament, but spirit enough to be interesting. I think she'll suit you." He helped her mount, his hands steadying her with a firm, yet gentle touch. As they rode through the estate, He taught her to jump small hedges, his instructions patient and encouraging. Laughter bubbled between them, and Eleanor felt a joy she hadn't known in months, the physical closeness and shared activity weaving a new thread of affection into their relationship. By the lake, swans glided across the still water, and Alexander skipped stones with practiced ease. "I spent hours here as a boy," he said, his voice soft with memory. "My mother would read while I fished." Eleanor watched him, her heart aching with empathy. "You were close to her?" she asked. "Very," he replied, his expression shadowed. "She died when I was 12. Consumption." She shared her own loss, and he turned to her, his eyes reflecting understanding. "Then you understand," he murmured, offering his arm as they walked back toward the house, the autumn colors framing their shared solace. In the library, surrounded by leather-bound books, Eleanor lost herself in a history volume, while Alexander worked at his desk, the journal lying nearby. Occasionally, one would read a passage aloud, sparking a discussion that revealed their intellectual kinship. She noticed his glances at the journal, a tangible link to his past, but she respected the unspoken boundary. The companionable silence between them felt like a balm, and when Alexander received a letter, his expression shifted, drawing her attention back to the present. Alexander's face darkened as he read the letter. "Grayson continues to make accusations," he said grimly. "He claims to have written evidence of my negligence in India." Eleanor moved to his side, her voice firm. "Then we must return to London and confront these falsehoods directly." He looked at her, surprise mingling with gratitude. "We? Yes, we," she insisted, placing a hand on his arm. "I am your wife, Alexander. Your battles are mine as well." Something in his eyes softened, and he clasped her hand. "Very well. We shall return tomorrow." The threat of the past only strengthened their unity. In the garden, Eleanor sat sketching the landscape, her charcoal capturing the play of light on the lake. So absorbed was she that she didn't hear Alexander approach until he stood beside her, watching. He picked up her sketchbook, his eyes widening as he flipped through pages filled with detailed drawings of staff, landscapes, and even a few of him, unguarded and thoughtful. "These are remarkable," he said, his voice filled with admiration. Eleanor blushed, explaining how sketching had been her solace. "You see the world with such clarity," he murmured, and in that moment, her hidden talent became a bridge to deeper intimacy. At a tenant's cottage, Mrs. Collins greeted them with worry etched on her face. "Robert's fever won't break," she explained. Eleanor stepped forward without hesitation, her knowledge of herbal remedies shining, as she prepared a mustard plaster and brewed thyme tea. Alexander watched, his admiration growing with each confident move she made. "Most ladies would offer sympathy from a distance," he said later, as they left. "My mother believed true nobility lies in service," Eleanor replied softly. His awe was palpable, and he helped her into the carriage with a new reverence. In the carriage, Alexander sat beside Eleanor instead of opposite, their shoulders touching. As the sunset painted the sky in golden hues, his hand found hers, their fingers entwining silently. No words were needed. The simple act spoke volumes of the emotional closeness they had forged. Shared smiles passed between them, and Eleanor felt a warmth spread through her chest. The journey back to Ravenwood Park, feeling like a passage into a new chapter of their lives. Rain tapped against the windows of the game room as Alexander taught Eleanor to play billiards. He stood behind her, guiding her aim, his breath warm on her neck. "Like this," he whispered, his voice low and intimate. She felt a flush rise to her cheeks, the playful tension between them charged with unspoken desire. "You're a quick study," he teased, and she laughed, the sound mingling with the crackle of the fire. As evening approached, they parted for dinner, the memory of his closeness lingering like a promise. That night, as Anna brushed Eleanor's hair, a knock came at the door. Alexander entered, his expression unguarded. "Might I have a word with you alone?" he asked. Once they were private, he took a deep breath. "I've treated you abominably," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "But these weeks have shown me what a fool I've been. You are extraordinary, Eleanor, and I no longer wish for a marriage in name only." Tears welled in her eyes as she reached out, silencing him with a touch. "I have wanted a true marriage since the day we wed," she whispered. Their kiss was tender, then passionate, sealing their commitment. In their connected chambers, the door between them now permanently open, they retired together, not out of duty but desire. Firelight danced across the room as they undressed, their touches tentative at first, then growing bolder with shared passion. Whispers of love and promises filled the air, and when they finally lay entwined, Eleanor felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Morning light found them still wrapped in each other's arms, happy and at peace. The cold distance of their wedding night, a distant memory. As their carriage rolled toward London through a fog-shrouded landscape, Eleanor and Alexander discussed the impending confrontation with Grayson. "We will face this together," he said, his hand resting on hers. She nodded, feeling Ravenwood House had truly become a home. "Your insight gives me strength," he admitted, and she smiled, her confidence in their partnership unwavering. The fog outside seemed less daunting now, their renewed bond a beacon, guiding them back to the city, ready to meet whatever challenges lay ahead as a united front. Ravenwood House welcomed them back with an air of familiar grandeur, but the atmosphere had shifted subtly, warmed by the newfound intimacy between Eleanor and Alexander. As they stepped into the entrance hall, the staff lined up with genuine smiles, their curtsies and bows reflecting not just duty, but affection. Mr. Phillips, the butler, beamed as he took their coats. "Welcome home, your graces. The household has missed your presence." Eleanor felt a surge of confidence as she moved through the rooms, her steps assured. She paused to discuss the week's menu with the housekeeper, her voice calm and authoritative. Alexander watched from the doorway, a faint smile playing on his lips. "I've received correspondence from the estate in Hampshire," he said, joining her in the study. "The tenant reports are promising, but I'd value your opinion on the proposed drainage improvements." Eleanor unrolled the plans on the oak desk, her fingers tracing the lines. "The current system seems inadequate for heavy rains. Perhaps we could redirect the flow here," she suggested, pointing to a shaded area. Alexander nodded, his gaze appreciative. "Your insight is invaluable, Eleanor. Together, we'll ensure the estate thrives." The shared workspace felt like a sanctuary, their partnership solidifying with each decision made side by side. The tranquility was shattered when a footman delivered a sealed letter to Alexander's study. He broke the wax seal, his expression hardening as he read. "It's from Grayson's solicitors," he said, his voice tight. "They demand £5,000 to prevent the publication of documents related to Janpur." Eleanor moved to his side, her eyes scanning the harsh script. "This is blackmail, plain and simple," she declared, her tone resolute. "We cannot allow him to profit from such deceit." Alexander crumpled the letter in his fist. "What would you have me do? Pay him to silence the lies?" "No," Eleanor said firmly, placing a hand on his arm. "We invite him here. Let him make his accusations to our faces. Hiding only gives his words power." Alexander met her determined gaze, and a flicker of admiration crossed his features. "Very well. I'll send for him at once. We face this together." Captain Grayson arrived at Ravenwood House looking more haunted than ever, his uniform frayed and his eyes shadowed with desperation. He stood awkwardly in the study, clearly taken aback to see Eleanor seated beside Alexander behind the massive desk. "I did not expect an audience, Your Grace," he muttered, bowing stiffly. "The Duchess is my partner in all matters," Alexander replied, his voice cool. "You may speak freely." Grayson's composure cracked. "You led my brother to his death in India. Your negligence cost James his life, and now I have nothing left," he shouted, slamming a bundle of papers onto the desk. Eleanor rose, her demeanor calm but firm. "Captain, vengeance will not bring your brother back." "What drives this cruelty?" Tears welled in Grayson's eyes. "His fiancée, Sarah. She's destitute since he died. I have no means to support her. This money, it's for her, not for me." The raw admission hung in the air, revealing the depth of his grief and the sympathetic motive behind his actions. Alexander stood slowly, his expression shifting from defense to empathy. He moved to a locked cabinet, retrieving a small wooden box. "Captain, I have never denied my responsibility for what happened at Janpur," he said, his voice low and measured. Your brother, Lieutenant James Grayson, was one of the bravest men I had the honor to command." He opened the box to reveal a medal on a faded ribbon. This was awarded to him posthumously for his actions that day. He stayed behind to save Private Collins, dragging him to safety while under fire. He died a hero, and his sacrifice saved others. Alexander held out the medal, his hands steady. "It belongs to you, as his family." Grayson's trembling fingers closed around the medal, his anger dissolving into sorrow. He never mentioned that in his letters. "James was modest to a fault," Alexander said softly, "but his courage deserves to be remembered, not tarnished by accusations. Let us honor him, rather than destroy each other." After Captain Grayson departed, the study felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. Alexander turned to Eleanor, his eyes filled with gratitude. "You were right to confront him directly," he murmured, pulling her into a close embrace. "Your strength gave me the courage to face the past." Eleanor rested her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "The past no longer defines you, Alexander. You've carried that burden long enough." He cupped her face in his hands. "With you by my side, I feel I can finally breathe again." Their lips met in a tender kiss, sealing the moment of relief and unity. As they stood by the window, watching the London fog lift, Eleanor knew their bond had deepened into an unshakable partnership. In the days that followed, Eleanor threw herself into her charity work, visiting the poorest parishes of London with renewed purpose. She brought her sketchbook, capturing the faces of women and children in quick, empathetic strokes. In a cramped room where a mother struggled to feed her infants, Eleanor knelt, showing her drawings to the local committee. "See here. The drainage in this alley is causing illness. We must petition for repairs." The community gathered around her, their eyes wide with hope. "Your Grace, you see us as we are," one woman whispered, tears in her eyes. Eleanor smiled, her heart swelling. Change begins with acknowledgement. "Together, we will build a better future." Her sketches became blueprints for reform, and the respect she earned was a balm to her soul, proving her role extended far beyond the glittering ballrooms. That evening, Alexander waited for Eleanor in the study, her sketches spread across his desk. When she entered, he looked up, his expression filled with pride. "These are remarkable, Eleanor. You've captured not just images, but stories. The way you document the conditions, it's moved me deeply." He took her hand, his touch warm. "I want to allocate funds from the estate to expand your efforts. We can establish a school in that parish, provide medical supplies. Your compassion is a gift, and I am honored to support it." Tears of happiness glistened in Eleanor's eyes. "Thank you, Alexander. With your backing, we can achieve so much more." They spent the next hour planning, their heads bent together over the drawings, their shared vision for a kinder world binding them ever closer. In the deep of night, Eleanor was jolted awake by Alexander's thrashing beside her. He cried out in Hindi, his words fragmented and desperate. "Ugh, Bacho!" as if reliving the ambush in his dreams. She shook him gently, her voice a soft anchor. "Alexander, wake up. You're safe." He gasped, his body drenched in sweat, and clung to her. "The fire! The screams! I couldn't save them all," he muttered, his eyes wild with remembered terror. Eleanor held him, stroking his hair. "It's over now. You're here with me." He buried his face in her neck, his breathing slowly steadying. "I dream of it still," he confessed hoarsely. "The heat, the chaos." She whispered reassurances until he drifted back to sleep, their bodies intertwined, the nightmare fading into the comfort of her presence. At breakfast the next morning, a servant accidentally dropped a silver tray, the clatter echoing sharply through the dining room. Alexander flinched violently, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the table edge. Eleanor noticed the fleeting panic in his eyes before he composed himself, taking a slow sip of tea. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. He nodded, avoiding her gaze. A minor start, nothing more, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed him. Eleanor stored the observation away, another piece of the puzzle that was her husband's hidden trauma. The incident passed without further comment, but it deepened her understanding of the wounds he carried. While tidying Alexander's study later that day, Eleanor noticed a small brass key glinting on his desk beside the worn leather journal from his army days. Her fingers itched to unlock it, to delve into the secrets of his past. She picked up the key, weighing it in her palm, imagining the stories within, the youthful idealism, the guilt, the pain. But then she thought of the trust they had built, the fragile bridges between them. With a resolute sigh, she set the key back down, leaving the journal untouched. Some boundaries were meant to be respected. Some truths were better shared voluntarily. Her decision felt like a silent vow, strengthening the bond they were carefully weaving. Alexander entered the study as Eleanor stepped away from the desk. His eyes fell on the key, then met hers with a look of profound gratitude. "You didn't read it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I would not violate your privacy, Alexander." "Trust is the foundation of what we have," she replied, her smile gentle. He crossed the room and took her hands. "Thank you. Your respect means more than I can say." He picked up the journal, his thumb brushing the cover. "I want to share it with you, the parts one can bear to revisit, not out of obligation, but because you've earned the right to know me fully." By the firelight that evening, Alexander opened the journal, its pages yellowed with age. He read aloud in a low voice, recounting his early days in India, the idealism, the camaraderie, the belief in his invincibility. Then his tone grew heavier as he described the ambush at Jaunpur, the smoke and confusion, the weight of command. "I led them into that valley, ignoring the warnings. James Grayson died because of my pride." Eleanor listened, her hand resting on his arm, offering silent comfort. When his voice broke, she whispered, "You carry their memory with honor, Alexander. That is what matters now." They closed the journal, emotionally spent, but closer than ever. The shared vulnerability healing old wounds. At the theater, seated in the Ravenwood box, Eleanor and Alexander presented a united front to society. They leaned close, sharing whispered observations about the performance, their laughter soft and genuine. When Alexander's hand found hers in the dim light, she felt the warmth of his touch spread through her. Around them, envious glances and approving murmurs rippled through the audience. "The Duke and Duchess seem truly happy," someone whispered nearby. Eleanor met Alexander's eyes, seeing the same contentment reflected there. For the first time, their public display felt authentic, a celebration of the love that had blossomed from cold convenience. Back at Ravenwood House, they settled in the drawing room to plan for Christmas. Eleanor sketched ideas for decorations, garlands of evergreen, candles in the windows, while Alexander watched with a fond smile. "I thought we might spend the holiday at the estate," he said, "and perhaps invite your father to join us. He should be part of our celebrations." Eleanor's eyes welled with tears of joy. "Oh, Alexander, that would mean the world to him, and to me." She embraced him, feeling the depth of his thoughtfulness. "We'll make it a family Christmas, full of love and new beginnings." The future stretched before them, bright with promise. The next morning, Eleanor pushed her breakfast around her plate, a wave of nausea making the food unappealing. Alexander noticed her pallor immediately. "You're unwell," he said, his brow furrowed with concern. "I'll send for Dr. Barrett at once." "It's nothing, truly," Eleanor insisted, forcing a smile. "Just the rich food from last night's dinner. I'll be fine after some rest." But she avoided his probing gaze, her mind already calculating the dates, a flicker of suspicion igniting in her heart. She dismissed his worries, not ready to voice the hope taking root within her. As their carriage rolled through the snowy countryside toward Ravenwood Park, Eleanor rested her head against Alexander's shoulder, fatigue weighing her down. He held her close, his arm a steady anchor. "Are you sure you're well enough for the journey?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. "Yes, the country air will revive me," she murmured, though she felt unusually drowsy. The landscape passed in a blur of white and gray, but the comfort of his presence soothed her. When they arrived after dark, the estate stood silent and welcoming, its windows aglow like beacons in the winter night. In her suite at Ravenwood Park, Eleanor retired early, the fire crackling in the hearth. Alexander hovered by the door, his anxiety palpable. "Shall I stay with you?" he asked. "No, I just need sleep," she assured him, though her mind raced. Once alone, she lay in the dim light, one hand resting on her stomach. She counted the weeks since her last courses, the signs adding up, the nausea, the fatigue, the subtle changes in her body. A hopeful smile touched her lips as she whispered to the darkness, "Could it be?" The suspicion grew into a quiet certainty, setting the stage for a revelation that would change everything. The morning light streamed into Eleanor's sitting room at Ravenwood Park, casting golden pools across the Persian rug and illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Eleanor stood by the window, her fingers unconsciously tracing the embroidered pattern of her dressing gown as she mentally counted the weeks. 2 months had slipped by since her last courses, and a familiar queasiness had haunted her mornings for over a fortnight. Anna, her maid, moved quietly about the room, arranging fresh linens, but Eleanor's thoughts were far away. A flutter, part excitement, part fear, stirred in her chest as she placed a tentative hand on her still flat abdomen. The possibility, once a distant dream, now felt startlingly real. She turned to Anna, her voice a soft whisper. "Please ask His Grace to join me. There is something I must share with him." Anna curtsied, a knowing smile touching her lips, and slipped from the room, leaving Eleanor alone with her hopeful smile and the sunlight warming her skin. Alexander entered the sitting room with a concerned frown, his tall frame filling the doorway. "Eleanor, Anna said you needed me. Are you unwell?" She moved toward him, her heart hammering against her ribs. Without a word, she took his hand and guided it to rest gently on her stomach, her own covering his. Her eyes met his, amber pools shining with unshed tears. "Alexander," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion, "I believe we are to have a child." For a moment he stood frozen, his gray eyes wide with disbelief. Then, as if the weight of her words finally settled upon him, he sank to his knees before her, his face pressed against the soft fabric of her gown. "A child," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "Our child." Tears welled in his eyes as he looked up at her, his expression one of overwhelming gratitude and joy. Eleanor cupped his cheek, her own tears falling freely now. "Yes," she breathed. "In the early summer." He rose, slowly, gathering her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. They stood by the tall window, arms entwined, watching the first snow of the season dust the formal gardens of Ravenwood Park in a blanket of white. Alexander's voice was low and fervent as he spoke. "I promise you, Eleanor, our child will know only love. No coldness, no distance. Only the warmth and security we have found in each other." He turned to her, his gaze intense. "You have transformed my life in ways I never thought possible. Before you, I was half a man, going through the motions. Now—" He trailed off, shaking his head in wonder. Eleanor leaned into his embrace, resting her head against his shoulder. "And you have given me a home, Alexander. Not just a title, but a true partnership." They stood in silence for a long moment, watching the snowflakes dance in the gray sky, their hearts full of visions of a future filled with laughter and love. In the study, seated at the heavy oak desk, Eleanor dipped a quill into the inkwell, her hand steady as she began to write. "Dearest Father," she penned, her script flowing across the parchment, "we would be honored if you would join us at Ravenwood Park for Christmas. There is joyous news to share." Alexander stood behind her, his hand resting on her shoulder. "Shall I add a note of my own?" he asked, his voice warm. Eleanor nodded, smiling up at him. "I know it would mean the world to him." Alexander took the quill, his own precise handwriting complementing hers. "Lord Edward," he wrote, "your presence would bring us great happiness. We look forward to welcoming you." Together they sealed the letter with the Ravenwood crest, their excitement palpable as they imagined the reunion. Dr. Mitchell, a kindly man with spectacles perched on his nose, completed his examination in the drawing room, the fire crackling cheerfully in the hearth. "There is no doubt, Your Grace," he said, turning to Eleanor with a smile. "You are indeed with child. I estimate the arrival in early summer, June, most likely." Alexander, who had been standing by the mantelpiece, his posture rigid with anticipation, let out a breath he seemed to have been holding. A beam of pure pride and joy spread across his face. "Thank you, Doctor," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "We are deeply grateful." Dr. Mitchell packed his medical bag, offering congratulations once more before taking his leave. As the door closed, Alexander crossed the room to Eleanor, taking her hands in his. "It is official," he whispered, his eyes shining. "We are to be parents." That night, in their shared bedchamber, the fire cast flickering shadows across the walls as Eleanor and Alexander lay entwined in the massive bed draped in deep blue velvet. "What if it is a girl?" Eleanor murmured, her head resting on his chest. "We could name her Charlotte, after my mother." Alexander stroked her hair, his touch gentle. "Or a boy, Edward, for your father," he replied. "But whatever it is, he or she will be loved beyond measure." He propped himself on an elbow, looking down at her with unwavering intensity. "Eleanor, I never knew I could feel this way. You have given me back my heart." She reached up to trace the line of his jaw. "And you have given me everything," she whispered. They talked late into the night, making plans for the nursery, imagining first steps and laughter, until sleep claimed them, their bodies curled together in peaceful slumber. The halls of Ravenwood Park buzzed with festive energy as the staff decked the corridors with evergreen garlands and ribbons of crimson and gold. Eleanor, a sketching book in hand, directed the placement of holly and ivy, her quick charcoal lines capturing ideas for the grand Christmas tree. Alexander, usually reserved, laughed aloud as he helped a footman hang mistletoe in the doorway, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Your Grace, you have a talent for this," Mrs. Winters, the housekeeper, remarked, admiring Eleanor's sketch of the proposed decorations. "It brings the ideas to life." Eleanor smiled, feeling the warmth of the communal effort. The atmosphere was one of united joy, the scent of pine and cinnamon filling the air, and for the first time, she felt truly part of the estate's heartbeat. Lord Edward's carriage arrived in a flurry of snow, and Eleanor rushed to the entrance hall, Alexander close behind. Her father stepped down, his face lined but brightening at the sight of her. "Eleanor, my dear," he exclaimed, enveloping her in a warm embrace. "You look radiant." She drew back, her eyes sparkling. "Father, we have news," she said, glancing at Alexander, who nodded encouragement. "We are expecting a child." Lord Edward's eyes filled with tears, and he pulled her into another hug. "A grandchild," he breathed. Then he turned to Alexander, grasping his hand firmly. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "for making my daughter so happy." Alexander met his gaze with respect. "It is I who am grateful, sir. She has brought light into my life." The dining room glowed with candlelight, the long table laden with roast goose, glazed vegetables, and plum pudding. Eleanor, Alexander, and Lord Edward raised their glasses in a toast. "To health, happiness, and the new life joining our family," Alexander said, his voice resonating with warmth. They shared stories. Lord Edward reminiscing about Eleanor's childhood, Alexander speaking of his own Christmases at Ravenwood Park, and Eleanor reflecting on how far they had come. She felt a profound sense of completeness, surrounded by the two men she loved most. The fire roared in the hearth, casting a golden hue over their content faces, and in that moment, Eleanor knew she had found not just a marriage, but a soul-deep connection. In the drawing room, surrounded by unwrapped gifts and the soft strains of piano music, Alexander presented Eleanor with a velvet box. Inside lay a new sketchbook, its covers tooled with intricate designs, and a sapphire necklace that caught the firelight. "For the artist and Duchess who captures hearts," he said softly. Eleanor, in turn, gave him a framed portrait she had sketched, a tender scene of the two of them walking in the gardens, their expressions filled with love. Alexander's eyes misted as he studied it. "It is perfect," he murmured. Lord Edward then offered a small, worn box containing family heirlooms, a pocket watch and a locket. "For the next generation," he said, his gesture symbolizing full acceptance and continuity. Eleanor seated herself at the pianoforte, her fingers drifting into the familiar notes of Silent Night. Alexander and Lord Edward stood beside her, their voices joining in harmony, rich and heartfelt. The fire crackled, casting a cozy glow over the room as they moved through carols, their laughter mingling with the music. Eleanor felt the spirit of the season wrap around them, a sense of peace, love, and shared tradition. For a while, the outside world faded, and they were simply a family, bound by joy and the promise of new beginnings. Later, in their bedchamber, Eleanor and Alexander lay together, the snow falling silently outside the window. "Do you remember our wedding day?" Eleanor whispered, her head on his shoulder. "How cold and distant we were." Alexander's arm tightened around her. "I remember telling you you would spend the night alone," he said, his voice laced with regret. "I never imagined I could feel this happiness." Eleanor lifted her head to meet his gaze. "We have both changed," she said. "You are not the man you were, and I am not the girl I was. Our love has transformed us." He kissed her forehead. "And it will only grow stronger," he vowed. They drifted to sleep, dreams of the future weaving through their minds, secure in the knowledge that their love was unshakable. The morning after Christmas dawned, bright sunlight glinting off the snow-blanketed gardens. In the breakfast room, they sat over a hearty meal of eggs and ham, discussing Eleanor's pregnancy and plans for the estate. "I shall visit often," Lord Edward promised, his eyes crinkling. "I want to be part of this child's life." Alexander nodded, his expression eager. "I find myself already looking forward to fatherhood, to teaching him to ride, to read." Eleanor smiled, listening to their light-hearted jokes and future-oriented talk. The room was filled with shared laughter and the easy comfort of family, a stark contrast to the strained silences of the past. At the entrance hall, Lord Edward prepared to depart, his carriage waiting in the drive. He hugged Eleanor tightly, his hand resting briefly on her abdomen. "Bless you and the child," he whispered. Then he turned to Alexander, shaking his hand with firm respect. "Take care of them," he said. "I will return for the birth, I promise." Eleanor waved goodbye, tears in her eyes, but they were tears of happiness. As the carriage rolled away, she slipped her hand into Alexander's, feeling the strength of their bond. They turned back into the house, ready to continue their life together, fortified by family ties. Arm in arm, they walked through the snow-covered gardens, their breath misting in the crisp air. "What about William for a boy?" Alexander suggested, his tone playful. "Or Elizabeth for a girl?" Eleanor laughed, her cheeks flushed with cold. "I rather like James," she countered. He pointed toward the lake, now frozen and glittering. "We shall teach him to skate there," he said, his voice filled with excitement. "And in summer we can picnic by the water." They paused beneath a bare-limbed oak, and Alexander drew her close, kissing her gently as snowflakes dusted their hair. The world was silent and beautiful, a canvas for their future dreams. The future nursery room stood empty, its walls awaiting color and life. Eleanor sketched quickly, her charcoal outlining a crib by the window, shelves for toys, and a rocking chair in the corner. "Soft blue and cream," she decided, showing Alexander her drawing, "and we can hang mobiles here." He measured the space with his eyes, his expression eager. "I will have it all ready by summer," he promised. "Every detail as you envision it." They talked of safety and comfort, their voices overlapping in excited exclamations. This room, once a symbol of duty, was now a promise of love and nurture. In the library, afternoon light slanted through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes in the air. Eleanor sat with a novel, while Alexander reviewed estate papers at his desk. Occasionally one would look up, sharing a smile or a quiet comment about a passage or a figure. The fire crackled in the hearth, and the silence between them was deep and comfortable, filled with an unspoken understanding. Eleanor felt the solidity of their partnership, a union of minds and hearts that needed no words. As evening approached, they set aside their books and papers, ready to face the night together, content in the knowledge that their love was the foundation of everything to come. Spring had arrived at Ravenwood Park in a burst of color and fragrance, the gardens awash with blooming roses and lilacs under a warm, sunny sky. Eleanor walked slowly along the gravel path, her hand resting on her rounded belly, while Alexander kept a protective arm around her. "I think Edward is a fine name," he said softly, his gaze tender. "It honors your father and carries strength." Eleanor smiled, feeling the baby stir within her. "And if it's a girl, perhaps Charlotte after your mother?" Alexander's eyes misted slightly. "She would have adored you," he murmured, helping her onto a bench where they could watch the bees hum among the flowers. The air was sweet with the promise of new beginnings, and for a moment they sat in comfortable silence, dreaming of the family they were about to become. In the quiet of her sitting room, Eleanor sat before a large mirror, her sketchbook open on her lap. With careful strokes of charcoal, she captured the curve of her pregnant form, the light from the window highlighting the soft swell of her abdomen. As she drew, her mind wandered back to the cold wedding day, the distant husband, and the slow, beautiful unraveling that had brought her here. Her reflection showed not the resigned bride of yesterday, but a woman filled with grace and purpose. She smiled, a tear of gratitude tracing her cheek, and thought how art had been her silent companion through it all, now documenting this most precious of times. Alexander entered the room quietly, his eyes immediately drawn to the sketch in Eleanor's hands. "May I?" he asked, and she nodded, handing him the drawing. He studied it, his expression awestruck. "Eleanor, this is breathtaking. You've captured not just your form, but the hope, the love." He knelt beside her, his voice thick with emotion. "This sketchbook, it's how I first saw the real you long before you let me in." Eleanor blushed, placing her hand over his. "And you, Alexander, saw the artist when I feared no one would." In that moment, surrounded by her art, they shared a kiss that spoke of deep connection and shared journeys. The summer night was thick with heat when Eleanor's labor began, pain gripping her in relentless waves. Alexander never left her side, his hand clasping hers as candles flickered against the dark. "Breathe, my love," he whispered, wiping sweat from her brow, his voice steady though his eyes betrayed his fear. "You are the strongest person I know." The midwife moved efficiently, offering instructions, but it was Alexander's presence that anchored Eleanor. Hours passed in a blur of effort and encouragement until, with a final mighty push, a sharp cry pierced the room. A tiny, perfect son was placed in Eleanor's exhausted arms, and Alexander wept openly, kissing her forehead. "Our child!" he breathed, his voice cracking with joy. Morning light streamed into the bedchamber, illuminating the newborn nestled in Eleanor's embrace. Alexander sat on the edge of the bed, his trembling fingers gently tracing the baby's features. "Edward," Eleanor whispered, her voice hoarse but radiant. "After my father, and for the steadfastness he represents." Alexander's tears fell freely as he cradled the infant. "Hello, Edward," he said, his voice a reverent murmur. "You are so loved." Eleanor watched them, her heart swelling with a fulfillment she had never imagined possible. In this moment, all the loneliness and coldness of the past melted away, replaced by the overwhelming warmth of family. The bedchamber soon filled with joyful noise as Lord Edward and Lady Beatrice arrived, their faces alight with happiness. Lord Edward beamed as he carefully took his grandson into his arms. "He has your eyes, Eleanor," he said, his voice choked with emotion. Lady Beatrice bustled in with gifts and gossip, kissing Eleanor's cheek. "Oh, my dear, he's perfect!" And to think, the gossip said this marriage would be a frosty affair. Look at you now. Laughter echoed through the room as they celebrated, sharing stories and toasts, the air thick with love and the promise of generations to come. Later, in the hushed intimacy of the bedchamber, Eleanor nursed baby Edward, the soft sounds of his feeding the only noise. Alexander watched from a nearby chair, his expression one of pure awe. "He's so small," he murmured, his voice filled with wonder, "and yet he has already changed everything." Eleanor smiled, her fingers gently stroking the baby's head. "Our future," she said softly, "full of laughter and love, just as we promised." Alexander leaned forward, his hand covering hers. "Together," he whispered, and they sat in peaceful silence, bound by the new life they had created. As evening fell, they sat on a garden bench, baby Edward sleeping peacefully in his pram beside them. The sunset painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, and Alexander took Eleanor's hand. "Do you remember our wedding day?" he asked, a smile playing on his lips. The rain, the coldness. I told you you'd spend the night alone. Eleanor laughed softly. And now look at us. Who would have thought that man of ice would melt into this? Alexander squeezed her hand. Because of you, my love. You saw the man I could be. Grateful and content, they watched the stars emerge, their hearts full of the transformation love had wrought. Alone in his study, Alexander opened the worn leather journal from his army days. For years it had been a source of pain, but now he traced the entries without the old hauntings. He read a passage about idealism lost, then gently closed it and placed it on a shelf beside the medal from Captain Grayson's brother. No longer symbols of failure, they were reminders of growth and redemption. He felt a profound peace settle over him, the ghosts of India, finally, at rest. With a quiet sigh, he left the study, ready to join his wife and son, his past integrated into a hopeful future. Eleanor visited the poor parish she had championed, her sketchbook in hand. The streets were cleaner, children played in a new courtyard, and smiles had replaced weary frowns. A little girl ran up to her, curtsying. "Thank you, Your Grace, the sketching Duchess. We have a school now." Eleanor's heart swelled as she saw her drawings, once mere observations, now manifested in thriving reforms. She knelt, her eyes misty. "You are all so brave," she said, humbled by their gratitude. In that moment, she knew her title was not about privilege, but purpose, and she felt a deep, abiding joy in the difference she had made. That evening, in the drawing room warmed by firelight, Eleanor eagerly described her visit to Alexander. "The children, Alexander, they're learning, they're happy. It's all because of the sketches, the plans we put into action." He listened, his smile proud and unwavering. "You, Eleanor, are the very best of what nobility should be, compassion in action." He took her hands, his eyes shining. "Let's expand this, together. More schools, better housing." She nodded, her excitement matching his. "Yes, together," she echoed, and they spent the next hour dreaming up new ways to serve, their partnership a testament to shared values and love. In the nursery, decorated exactly as Eleanor had sketched with soft blues and golds, they laid baby Edward in his crib. Alexander hummed a lullaby, his voice low and soothing, while Eleanor joined in, their harmonies blending in the quiet room. The mobile, above the crib, a design from her sketchbook, spun gently, casting moonlit shadows. As Edward's eyes drifted closed, Alexander leaned down and kissed Eleanor softly over the crib. "Our family," he whispered, and she nodded, her heart too full for words. They stood there for a long moment, watching their son sleep, surrounded by the love they had built. Back in their shared bedchamber, moonlight streamed through the windows, illuminating their embraced forms. Eleanor rested her head on Alexander's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "We are so blessed," she murmured, her voice sleepy. He held her tighter, his lips brushing her hair. "All because of you, my love. You healed me. You gave me a family." They spoke in hushed tones of their journey, from strangers to soulmates, until sleep gently claimed them. Wrapped in each other's arms, they drifted off, perfectly content, the connected chambers, a symbol of the unity they now cherished. Years later, the gardens of Ravenwood Park echoed with the laughter of children. Edward, now a sturdy boy, chased his younger sister Charlotte by the lake, their joyous shouts mingling with the rustle of leaves. Eleanor sat on a bench, her sketchbook capturing the scene, the sunlight dappling through trees, the love in every line. Alexander stood behind her, his hand on her shoulder, watching with pride. "Remember when this was just a dream?" he said softly. Eleanor looked up, her smile radiant. "And now it's our life," she replied, as they shared a family hug, the sketch, a permanent record of their enduring happiness. Dear listener, as the final images of Eleanor and Alexander's story fade, perhaps you see echoes of your own life in their journey. How many of us, like Alexander, build walls around our hearts, fearing vulnerability? And how often do we, like Eleanor, hold on to hope, believing in the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. Their tale reminds us that transformation is always possible, that coldness can thaw into warmth, and loneliness can blossom into connection. Whatever challenges you face, remember that within you lies the same capacity for renewal. Thank you for sharing in this story of redemption and love. May it inspire you to open your heart to the possibilities around you. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to our channel and liking this video. Your support helps us create more tales of love and transformation. Share your thoughts in the comments. We love hearing from you. And don't forget to click on the next suggested story for another unforgettable journey. From all of us here, thank you for listening, and may your own story be filled with hope and happy endings.